Case 1. Amber Waterman. In the digital age, social media connects people across distances, creating opportunities for friendship and community. But on October 31st, 2022, in Maysville, Arkansas, that connectivity became a weapon. Amber Waterman used Facebook to pose as Lucy, offering assistance to Ashley Bush, who was expecting. The meeting at a convenience store would be Bush's last. What drives someone to such calculated deception? Waterman drove Bush across state lines to Pineville, Missouri, where Bush died from penetrating torso injuries. The unborn child, Valkyrie Willis, perished as well. Later that day, around 5 p.m., first responders were called to a Pineville store where Waterman presented a deceased infant, falsely claiming she had just given birth in her truck. The motive appeared to be Waterman's desire to claim the baby as her own. She had created an elaborate deception using a fake identity online to build trust with Bush. The planning involved in this approach, creating a persona, establishing contact, arranging the meeting, demonstrated premeditation rather than an impulsive act. First responders immediately doubted Waterman's story about the birth. Their suspicions triggered investigations by multiple agencies, including the FBI and Benton County Sheriff's Office. The digital trail from Facebook communications provided crucial evidence linking Waterman to Bush. Her husband, Jamie Waterman, later pleaded guilty as an accessory for his role in helping conceal Bush's body. The case took an unusual legal path due to its interstate nature. On July 30th, 2024, Waterman pleaded guilty in federal court to kidnapping resulting in death and causing fetal demise. Judge Stephen R. Bowe sentenced her on October 15, 2024, to 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole in the federal system. However, Arkansas also filed state charges. Waterman faces 2 capital charges in kidnapping in Benton County, with trials scheduled for April 7, 2026. The state is seeking the most severe penalty possible. Waterman's defense team challenged this dual prosecution, arguing it constituted double jeopardy. The Arkansas Supreme Court rejected this appeal on May 8, 2025, allowing state proceedings to continue despite the federal sentence. Mental competency became another legal issue. Waterman's defense presented evidence of a brain lesion causing seizures and communication difficulties, arguing this impaired her ability to understand proceedings. After a competency hearing in September 2025, she was deemed fit to stand trial, paving the way for the 2026 Arkansas trial. Waterman admitted to the kidnapping with intent to take the child. No expressions of remorse were noted in court documents. Bush's family described the incident as unspeakable, struggling to comprehend how someone could plan such actions against a trusting person. As of November 2025, Waterman is held in Benton County Jail awaiting her Arkansas trial. The federal life sentences ensure she'll never be free, but the state trial will determine whether Arkansas adds its own sentence. Bush's family continue to mourn both Ashley and the granddaughter they'll never meet, while Waterman faces the consequences of her calculated deception. Case 2. Shawna Cash. On June 26, 2021, at a White Oak gas station in Pine Ridge, Arkansas, a routine police encounter turned deadly. Pine Ridge police officer Kevin Apple approached a Jeep, unaware that the driver had been fleeing law enforcement earlier that day. Shawna Cash, behind the wheel, made a split-second decision that would define the rest of her life. She accelerated, dragging Apple 149 feet before he succumbed to his injuries. What drives someone to such a desperate act? Cash's background revealed a pattern of instability. By age 16, she had lived at 35 different addresses, a detail her defense team emphasized during trial. Her brother testified about serious family problems, and she had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress at 11. This chaotic upbringing, combined with substance dependency issues, created what experts described as impaired judgment. The incident didn't happen in isolation. Cash had evaded police pursuits earlier that same day in Rogers, Arkansas. Prosecutors argued she viewed Officer Apple as merely a speed bump in her life, showing indifference to human life. Her accomplice, Elijah Andazola, had instructed her to flee, though prosecutors maintained she acted with intent to evade arrest at any cost. The case went to trial in Benton County Circuit Court in February 2024. Surveillance footage from the gas station captured the incident, providing undeniable evidence. Prosecutors presented aggravating factors: taking a life to avoid arrest, disrupting law enforcement operations, and the suffering Apple endured while conscious during the dragging. Cash's defense team countered with over 100 mitigating factors. They highlighted her documented childhood difficulties, her PTSD diagnosis, her substance dependency that clouded judgment, and argued she lacked intent to cause death. However, a jail phone call where Cash laughed about her notoriety significantly damaged her case. Prosecutors used this recording to argue she showed no remorse for what had occurred. After 3 hours of deliberation on guilt and 4 hours on sentencing, the jury convicted Cash of capital charges and recommended life without parole, rejecting the prosecution's request for the most severe penalty. Judge Brad Caron added consecutive sentences: 10 years for fleeing, 6 years each for 2 aggravated incidents, and 1 year for obstructing operations, plus fines. The courtroom statements revealed the case's emotional weight. Defense attorney Catherine Street urged mercy, saying, "I'm asking you not to end Shawna Cash's life because you don't have to." Prosecutor Joshua Robinson countered by emphasizing Apple's restraint in not using his weapon. He showed mercy, and she showed none. As of November 2025, Cash has 30 days to appeal her conviction. She remains incarcerated in Arkansas, where she'll spend the rest of her life unless her appeal succeeds. Case 3. Virginia Ann Hyatt. In Texarkana, Arkansas, jealousy and suspicion poisoned what had been a 40-year marriage. Virginia Ann Hyatt, born around 1949, had been with her husband, James, for decades. But by 2013, she had become convinced he was having a relationship with another woman, Patricia Wheelington. That suspicion would drive her to an irreversible decision. How does decades of marriage end in such tragedy? Hyatt and her husband James were regulars at local dance halls, part of a social scene where couples gathered for music and companionship. Patricia Wheelington, also a regular at these venues, came to Hyatt's attention as someone who seemed too friendly with James. Whether the affair was real or imagined, Hyatt's perception of betrayal consumed her. On December 3, 2013, Hyatt confronted Wheelington and shot her 5 times, ensuring there would be no survival. The repeated shots indicated this wasn't a moment of panic, but a determined act. Wheelington, who was 75 years old, died at the scene. The evidence against Hyatt was substantial. Investigators found voicemails she had left for Wheelington, including one where she pleaded, "Please give me my husband back." These recordings demonstrated her fixation on the perceived affair and her emotional state leading up to the incident. Surveillance footage placed Hyatt near the scene around the time of the incident. Gunshot residue testing on her hands and clothing provided physical evidence linking her directly to the shooting. The combination of motive, opportunity, and physical evidence created an overwhelming case. The trial in February 2016 lasted several days. Prosecutors presented the voicemails, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and testimony from people who knew about the tensions between Hyatt and Wheelington. The defense attempted to challenge the evidence and suggest alternative explanations, but the jury found the prosecution's case convincing. The jury convicted Hyatt of capital charges, and she was sentenced to life in prison without remote possibility of parole. The sentence reflected the premeditated nature of the crime. The voicemail showed she had been thinking about the situation for some time before acting. Hyatt appealed her conviction, arguing various legal issues, including the sufficiency of evidence and the admissibility of certain testimony. The Arkansas Supreme Court affirmed the conviction in 2018, finding no reversible errors in the trial proceedings. The appeals court found the evidence more than adequate to support the jury's verdict. The voicemail where Hyatt pleaded for her husband back revealed the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. Her possessiveness and inability to cope with the perceived threat to her marriage drove her to eliminate what she saw as the problem. The tragedy was that even if the affair was real, there were countless other ways to respond that wouldn't have ended with someone dead and Hyatt spending the rest of her life in prison. As of November 2025, Hyatt remains incarcerated at the McPherson unit in Newport, Arkansas. She's now in her mid-70s, spending what should have been her retirement years behind bars. Her 40-year marriage ended not just with her actions against Wheelington, but with the destruction of her own freedom and future. Wheelington's death left her family and friends grieving someone taken from them over a romantic dispute. Whether or not she was actually having an affair with James Hyatt became irrelevant. She didn't deserve to die over it. The case demonstrated how jealousy, left unchecked, can transform into rage and then into irreversible action. The dance halls where this triangle played out continued their regular schedules, but the community was left shaken by what had occurred among people they knew. The social scene that had brought people together for enjoyment had become the backdrop for tragedy. Case 4. Georgia Louise Weaver. In Powhatan, Arkansas, a small town where everyone knew their neighbors, family disputes sometimes festered for years. Georgia Louise Weaver, born in 1938, grew up in a large family of 11 siblings. After her father passed away in 1953, she left school to help support the household, eventually marrying young and starting her own family. But beneath the surface of this ordinary life, resentment was building. What turned sibling rivalry into something deadly? The conflict centered on an estate dispute with her sister Jeannie Allen. Between 1992 and 1993, Weaver poisoned Jeannie with arsenic, a method that allowed the harm to occur gradually over time. Jeannie's health deteriorated slowly before she finally passed away on January 17, 1993. The gradual nature of the poisoning meant Jeannie suffered over an extended period. But Jeannie wasn't Weaver's only target. She also poisoned her niece, Teresa Teston, though Teston survived the attempt. This additional victim suggested a pattern rather than a single act driven by momentary emotion. The deliberate nature of poisoning, obtaining the substance, administering it repeatedly, watching the effects, demonstrated sustained intent. The motive appeared to be greed and revenge stemming from disputes over family assets. When sisters clash over estates and inheritances, most resolve their differences through lawyers and probate courts. Weaver chose a far more permanent solution. The financial gain she hoped to achieve through her sister's death ultimately cost her everything. The investigation eventually uncovered what was happening. Arsenic testing on Jeannie's remains revealed the cause, and investigators traced the rat poison back to Weaver's workplace, where she had access to such substances. The scientific evidence, combined with testimony about the family disputes, built a case that prosecutors could bring to trial. Weaver was charged with capital charges for Jeannie's death and battery for poisoning Teston. The trial featured medical testimony about arsenic poisoning, evidence about access to the poison, and witnesses who described the family tensions. Witnesses noted Weaver's suspicious behavior around the time of Jeannie's illness, including her unusual interest in her sister's condition and her reactions to questions about it. The jury convicted Weaver on all charges. She received life imprisonment without possibility of parole for taking Jeannie's life, plus an additional 30 years for the battery charge against Teston. These sentences ensured she would never be free again. The conviction was affirmed on appeal in 1996, with the Arkansas Supreme Court finding sufficient evidence to support the jury's verdict. Weaver's appeals argued various legal issues, but none succeeded in overturning the conviction or securing a new trial. Throughout the legal proceedings, Weaver showed little remorse for her actions. The calculated nature of poisoning, the repeated administrations over months, the watching and waiting suggested someone who had made peace with her decision. Observers noted her demeanor remained relatively unchanged even as the evidence mounted against her. The investigation spent her remaining years incarcerated at the McPherson unit in Newport, Arkansas. She died in 2017 while still in custody, having served over 2 decades of her life sentence. Her death ended a life that had been defined in its final chapters by the actions she took against her own family members. The case highlighted how financial disputes within families can sometimes escalate into tragedy. Most inheritance disagreements, no matter how bitter, are settled through legal channels. Weaver's choice to use poison rather than pursue legitimate remedies demonstrated how greed and resentment can override familial bonds and basic human decency.
Case 5. Elsbeth Tracer Kittinger. On April 1, 2018, along Interstate 30 near Rockport, Arkansas, what should have been a routine traffic stop turned into a life-threatening situation for Trooper Kyle Sheldon. Elsbeth Kittinger, a Texas resident traveling through Arkansas, was pulled over for a traffic violation. The interaction would escalate in ways neither party likely anticipated. How does a traffic stop become a life-changing event? During the stop, Kittinger fired a weapon at Trooper Sheldon, striking him and causing serious injuries. Sheldon required surgery and extensive medical treatment, but survived the incident. His survival was somewhat fortunate given the circumstances. Shootings during traffic stops often have far worse outcomes for the officers involved. After shooting Sheldon, Kittinger fled the scene, triggering a pursuit. The motive for shooting the trooper remains unclear from public records. There's no indication she had outstanding warrants or was involved in other serious crimes that would explain such a desperate response to being pulled over. Sometimes the reasons behind such escalations are never fully understood. The pursuit didn't last long before Kittinger was involved in a shootout with law enforcement. She was wounded during this exchange and subsequently taken into custody. Being wounded in the shootout meant she required medical treatment before she could be formally processed and charged. Kittinger faced multiple serious charges: first-degree battery against an officer and commission of a felony with a firearm. These charges reflected both the attack on Sheldon and the broader danger she had posed during the incident. Battery against an officer carries enhanced penalties compared to battery against civilians, recognizing the particular threat such actions pose to public safety. Rather than proceed to trial, Kittinger pleaded guilty to the charges. The guilty plea avoided a trial where prosecutors would have presented evidence about the shooting and pursuit. It also spared Sheldon from having to testify in detail about an experience that had nearly cost him his life. On August 27, 2018, she was sentenced to life in prison plus 15 years. Unlike some life sentences that don't include parole possibility, Kittinger's sentence structure suggests she could eventually become eligible for parole, though she would need to serve a substantial portion of the sentence first. The additional 15 years for the firearm charge would run consecutively, extending her minimum time before any parole consideration. The sentencing hearing included statements about the impact on Sheldon. He addressed the court about why he had chosen law enforcement as a career, saying he wanted to break the cycle of problems he had seen in his community. His dedication to public service nearly cost him his life during what should have been a routine traffic stop. As of November 2025, Kittinger serves her sentence at the McPherson unit in Newport, Arkansas. She's been incarcerated for over 7 years, with many more to serve before any possibility of parole. Her case serves as a reminder of the dangers law enforcement officers face during even the most routine interactions. Trooper Sheldon survived and recovered from his injuries, eventually returning to his duties. His survival allowed him to continue serving his community. Though he carries the physical and emotional scars of that April day, his experience highlights both the risks officers accept when they put on the uniform and their resilience in continuing to serve, even after facing such dangers.
Case 7. Heather Swain. In December 2012, near Prairie Grove, Arkansas, Heather Swain became involved in events that led to the death of Ronnie Bradley. The case involved multiple people working together, with Bradley being taken from one location, harmed in a vehicle, and his body later disposed of. Swain's role was as an accomplice rather than the primary actor. How do people become involved in such situations? Bradley had a condition that left him particularly vulnerable. The accomplices apparently blamed him for a wife's death, though the full details of this accusation and whether it had any basis in reality remain unclear from court records. This perceived grievance appeared to motivate the group's actions against him. Swain participated alongside Anthony Swinford, Timothy Swinford, and James Patton. Each faced charges related to their roles in the kidnapping and subsequent events. The group worked together to take Bradley, harm him, and then dispose of his body, with each member contributing to different aspects of the overall crime. Swain was arrested along with her accomplices, as investigators pieced together what had happened to Bradley. The evidence against the group included testimony from witnesses and physical evidence connecting them to the incident. The case proceeded to trial in January 2014. The jury convicted Swain as an accomplice to capital charges and kidnapping. Her role, while not as direct as some other participants, was deemed significant enough to warrant serious charges under accomplice liability principles. The jury determined she had knowingly participated in the crimes. Swain appealed her conviction, and the case went through the appeals process. The Arkansas Supreme Court affirmed her conviction in 2015 and again in 2017 after a second appeal. The courts found the evidence supported the jury's verdict and that no reversible errors had occurred during the trial. She received a sentence of life without parole for the capital charge plus 25 years for the kidnapping charge. These sentences effectively ensure she'll remain incarcerated for the rest of her life. During the legal proceedings, Swain claimed she was herself a victim of circumstances. The judge noted an outburst during sentencing, suggesting emotional volatility around the proceedings. However, the courts ultimately held her accountable as an accomplice who participated in the crimes. One aspect of her appeals involved questions about whether medication she was taking might have affected her decisions during plea negotiations. The appeals court examined this issue, but found it didn't warrant overturning the conviction or granting a new trial. As of November 2025, Swain serves her sentence at the McPherson unit in Newport, Arkansas. The case remains cited in legal discussions about accomplice liability and the extent to which all participants in serious crimes should be held responsible, even when their roles weren't identical to the primary actors. Bradley's life ended due to accusations and grievances that, even if they had been true, didn't justify the actions taken against him. His condition made him particularly vulnerable to those who targeted him, and his inability to defend himself effectively made the crimes against him especially troubling. The accomplices each received sentences reflecting their participation. Case 8. Shaniqua Finley.
In November 2016, at Best Shot Liquor Store in North Little Rock, a routine day for clerk Dilip Kumar Patel took a tragic turn. Shaniqua Finley entered the store and took a $25 bottle of Evan Williams whiskey without paying. What seemed like a simple theft escalated when an accomplice fired a weapon and Patel later died from his injuries. How does a petty theft become something far worse? The case against Finley centered on accomplice liability. She was convicted not as the shooter, but as an accomplice to both capital charges and aggravated robbery. Under Arkansas law, participants in a crime can be held responsible for all outcomes of that crime, even if they didn't personally commit every act. The investigation traced evidence back to Finley through witness accounts and physical evidence. A witness reported seeing a woman in a green vehicle linked to Finley's girlfriend. When police searched the apartment Finley shared with her girlfriend, they found both the weapon and the stolen whiskey bottle. Ballistics testing confirmed the weapon matched evidence from the scene. The trial in Pulaski County featured testimony about the theft and subsequent events. Prosecutors argued that Finley's role in the robbery made her responsible for all consequences, including Patel's death. The defense challenged whether the evidence was sufficient to prove Finley's involvement beyond reasonable doubt. In August 2018, a jury convicted Finley of capital charges and aggravated robbery as an accomplice. She was sentenced to life without parole. However, the case didn't end there. Finley appealed, raising two main arguments: that the evidence was insufficient to support the conviction and that prejudicial testimony had tainted the trial. The appeal focused particularly on hearsay evidence. A detective testified about phone logs linking Finley to disposal of the weapon, and the defense argued this violated rules against hearsay testimony. They contended that allowing this testimony denied Finley a fair trial. The Arkansas Supreme Court affirmed the conviction in 2019, finding the evidence sufficient to support the jury's verdict. However, the decision wasn't unanimous. A dissenting opinion argued that the hearsay evidence was indeed prejudicial and should have warranted a new trial. This dissent highlighted ongoing legal debates about what evidence should be admissible and how courts should balance probative value against potential prejudice. Throughout the legal proceedings, Finley maintained a position that could be characterized as claiming mistaken identity, a whodunit defense, suggesting prosecutors had the wrong person. No direct quotes from Finley appear in public court records, and remorse wasn't noted in the available documentation. Patel, a 65-year-old store clerk, was working to support himself when his life was cut short over a $25 bottle of liquor. His family's loss, while not detailed in public records, represents the human cost of the crime. A person going about their daily work, serving customers, ended up paying with his life for someone else's decision to steal rather than pay. As of November 2025, Finley serves her life sentence without parole at the McPherson unit in Newport, Arkansas. The case remains cited in legal discussions about accomplice liability and the extent to which participants in crimes should be held responsible for outcomes they may not have directly caused or intended. The legal principle applied in Finley's case, that accomplices bear responsibility for foreseeable consequences of crimes they participate in, remains controversial. Some argue it's necessary to deter criminal enterprises and hold all participants accountable. Others contend it can result in disproportionate punishment for those who played lesser roles.
Case 9. Cathy Lynn Torres. Some cases are particularly difficult to discuss due to the nature of the victims involved. In March 2015 in Arkansas, Cathy Lynn Torres and her husband Mauricio faced charges involving serious harm to a family member. The case involved patterns of ongoing mistreatment that ultimately proved fatal.
What circumstances lead to such outcomes within families? An autopsy confirmed the cause as resulting from serious ongoing mistreatment, providing the evidence prosecutors needed to pursue capital charges. The investigation revealed a household where serious problems had existed for some time, though the full extent hadn't been recognized by outside observers. During sentencing hearings, additional disturbing information emerged. Adult children from Mauricio's previous relationships testified about their own experiences growing up in his household, describing patterns of mistreatment they had endured. This testimony painted a picture of intergenerational problems within family dynamics. One detail that later drew scrutiny was that the Department of Human Services had received prior reports about the family situation. These earlier reports were deemed unsubstantiated, meaning investigators didn't find sufficient evidence at the time to confirm concerns. This raised difficult questions about how systems designed to protect vulnerable people can sometimes fail to identify serious problems until it's too late. On March 8, 2017, Torres pleaded guilty to capital charges and battery, accepting a plea deal that allowed her to avoid facing the most severe possible penalty. The agreement resulted in a sentence of life without parole for the capital charge, plus 20 years for battery. These sentences effectively ensure she'll spend the remainder of her life incarcerated. Her attorney conveyed that Torres expressed deep regret for her role in what occurred. The statement acknowledged her involvement, while the plea deal spared all parties from the emotional toll of a full trial. Mauricio faced separate charges and proceedings for his role in the situation. The case highlighted how difficult it can be for outside systems to identify and intervene in family situations where serious problems exist behind closed doors. Neighbors often have no idea what's happening in nearby homes. Teachers and others who interact with families regularly may see warning signs but lack clear evidence to trigger interventions. As of November 2025, Torres remains incarcerated at the McPherson Unit in Newport, Arkansas. The facility houses women serving life sentences throughout the state, providing long-term custody for those convicted of the most serious offenses.
Case 10. Cecilia Rolson. In Marmaduke, Arkansas in April 1979, Cecilia Rolson became involved in a situation that would result in the shooting of Carl Leip. Rolson, born around 1949, was described by neighbors as a well-liked resident of the small community. But prosecutors would argue she masterminded a plan to remove someone who stood in the way of other objectives. Can someone truly change after decades behind bars? The motive, according to prosecutors, involved Leip obstructing plans related to a business venture. The specifics of what exactly Leip was preventing remained somewhat unclear from public records, but prosecutors convinced a jury that eliminating him was Rolson's goal. The case involved accomplices, including Rosa Leip, who cooperated with investigators. Rosa Leip's cooperation proved crucial to the prosecution. Her testimony provided details about the planning and execution that investigators might not have otherwise obtained. The evidence included the recovery of the weapon used and testimony connecting Rolson to the conspiracy. What made the case notable was that there had been multiple previous attempts on Leip's life, suggesting a sustained effort rather than a single impulsive act. This pattern of repeated attempts demonstrated determination and planning rather than a moment of poor judgment. Rolson's first trial resulted in a conviction in 1980. She received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. She appealed, and the conviction was affirmed in 1982 by the Arkansas Supreme Court. The appeals court found sufficient evidence to support the jury's verdict and no reversible legal errors. Throughout her incarceration, Rolson maintained aspects of her defense. Though she admitted to lying during the investigation, her position on her guilt remained somewhat ambiguous.
She denied the most serious aspects while acknowledging she hadn't been truthful with investigators. The case took an unexpected turn decades later. In 2021, Governor Asa Hutchinson commuted Rolson's sentence, making her eligible for parole after serving over 40 years. The commutation reflected consideration of her age, her behavior during incarceration, and assessments suggesting she no longer posed a threat to public safety. Rolson's daughter had advocated for her mother's release, arguing that the conviction was wrongful and that her mother had been unfairly implicated. The daughter's campaign highlighted questions about the original case. Though the commutation didn't overturn the conviction or declare Rolson innocent, it simply made parole possible. The commutation sparked debate in Arkansas about rehabilitation and second chances. Some argued that someone in their 70s who had served 4 decades had paid their debt to society and deserved the possibility of freedom in their remaining years. Others felt that the seriousness of taking a life warranted lifetime incarceration regardless of age or time served. As of November 2025, Rolson's current status is unclear from public records. She became parole eligible in 2021, but whether the parole board granted release isn't confirmed in available sources. If she remains incarcerated, she's at the McPherson unit in Newport, Arkansas. If paroled, she would be under supervision and restrictions designed to protect public safety. Carl Leip's life ended in 1979, and no sentence length or commutation can restore what his family lost. Whether Rolson deserved the commutation depends on one's perspective about the purpose of imprisonment and whether people can fundamentally change over decades behind bars. This was all from Crime Lens today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another chilling case that will keep you on the edge of your seat.